Let's get into it here with Best Ball 101, Herzig. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, or at least some people listening to this, don't even understand what the format is. Maybe you can go high level on the format and why it gets so soft.
Yeah, and so we'll go into specifics of two different sites because Underdog and DraftKings have their different kind of variations. But in general, this is best ball specifically for the playoffs. It is a lot smaller rosters. It's going to be 10 spots or 12 spots. And instead of having a regular season, a couple playoff rounds here, each round you have to survive in advance. So you have to form a team that is good enough to get out of the wild card round, the divisional round, the conference championship, and then is live in the Super Bowl. In the Super Bowl, we have two teams. So obviously, you want to build a team that is actually able to thrive in a Super Bowl. So this game, it comes far more in, down to strategy aspects. Can I stack the right teams? How do I stack the right teams to make sure I can actually survive the buys, the wild card rounds? But at the end of the day, all the money, it's all up top. It's all in the Super Bowl aspect. So we want to build teams that if we want to be plus AV, if we want to have the greatest chance of kind of realizing our edge in this, it comes to build teams that can actually have a chance at winning in the Super Bowl. And so, as you said, where's that edge? That edge really comes down to is so many people they're just building teams to maybe, hey, let me draft the best players that are going to be live. Maybe I'm going to take players from 6 different teams, but they're all really good players. And that's not how you're going to actually win. Maybe you min cash, but that's not what we're playing for. That's not going to be a positive expected value across your entire portfolio.
Okay, so I guess, Brott, the question is, should all of our teams have a certain number of players from the NFC and a certain number of players from an AFC team? Should all our teams look the same? In other words, team stacks of an NFC team and then team stacks of an AFC team.
In almost all cases, absolutely. I'd say pretty much the only time you don't want to is if you somehow get into a very unique scenario where you're just going on a single team stack, where you're expecting that team to just score a ton of points all throughout the playoffs en route to making it to the Super Bowl. Because ultimately, like Herzig said, this is a strategy game and we need to arrive in the Super Bowl with our team advancing where we can actually fill out an entire roster in the Super Bowl, or else we're going to lose to all the other teams that did get to the Super Bowl round with a full roster. And there's no point in showing up there if we don't have a chance to win. So typically the way that's going to happen is we're going to have X% of our players from the NFC representative in the Super Bowl and Y% from the AFC representative. And then ideally we'll be able to fill out the whole roster, meaning quarterback, running back, 2 wide receivers, flex. And if we're playing on DraftKings, then we also have tight end as well.
So what about stuff like 5-1s, right? And we talk about this in Showdown all the time. What if I show up to the Super Bowl with 5 Lions and 1 Steeler, and that's the Super Bowl? Can I win with that, Herzig? Is that a strategy at all? Or is it always, I need team stacks on both sides?
Yeah, I think that's very, I'd say, viable. Now, the example you gave is 5 Lions. If the Lions get the bye, that's 5 zeros you're taking in the first round. So we got to figure that out in itself. But if we ignore that aspect, 5 Lions and Steelers, maybe you have just Pickens. I mean, couldn't you very much see a showdown lineup that we stack 5 on one team, 1 on the other? Now, let's say we're going against the Bills, or you're going against, I guess probably the Ravens. Now maybe if I only have Justice Hill, or I only have Rashad Bateman or Zay Flowers, you don't feel nearly as good about it. So you probably do want to take a flexible, agile approach. And depending on which teams you're stacking for that Super Bowl, we can build strategically.
Okay, the wild card round, and we're talking about Super Bowl now. You have to get to the Super Bowl, and part of that is the wild card round. Now there will be 1 bye from each conference. Unlike a lot of years, it is not clear who will be getting the buys yet. Honestly, right now, given the state of Patrick Mahomes, I would probably bet on the Bills getting the bye if I had to bet. On the other side, Lions and Eagles feels like a pretty big toss-up right now. Who will get the bye there? So it's important to figure out, Sam, but I know people are going to be listening to this more for evergreen strategy in terms of getting out of the wild card round. What you can't do is have a team full of all guys on teams that obviously will have the first round bye, but the teams that get the bye are also most likely to make the Super Bowl. So how do you balance between getting out of the wild card round and the teams that are most likely to be in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance there. And I think it's an area where the field can make a lot of mistakes where they maybe go too far in either direction of they try too hard to get out of the first round and then they're not building teams that are really live to win in the final round. And then on the other hand, maybe they draft Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs end up getting the bye, and then they never end up drafting another quarterback that correlates with the rest of their team. And they're just eating a zero at the quarterback position for their team. I think also it really depends on site and contest structure. So a lot of the contests that DraftKings has posted so far, only one lineup from each initial draft pod advances. So that's a lot more difficult than a lot of the underdog drafts where two teams advance. And I know it's just 1 versus 2, but that's subtly a very large difference because when, at least in the first round, it's impossible for any team to have the same player twice. If you have a guy who goes for 40 points, let's say, that might be enough to kind of cover you at other positions where you're really weak because it's impossible for anybody else to have that position. If you kind of think last season, especially on DraftKings where you had to play a tight end, Jake Ferguson absolutely demolished all the other tight ends. He scored 3 touchdowns in the first round. He might have had 100 yards or so, PPR bonus on DK. All of that was enough. I saw some crazy teams advancing even without a quarterback in the first round on DraftKings. So you really need to think through what you need from your team in order to advance, and then kind of examine the likelihood of that route actually being viable.
Yeah, I think it's an important spot. Herzig, anything to add on the wild card advance stuff? And especially for people drafting right now who we don't even know. And we'll get to more on this in a second, but we don't even know who's going to get the buys yet.
Yeah. I think with this wild card round as well, you really want to make sure that when you're drafting a team that has kind of all the roster spots, but is not a major dog to come to the Super Bowl. And so we can start thinking about it in the early periods. But if you're drafting, let's say, for example, Buffalo, Detroit, right now, it's just so difficult because with that wild card round, we really just have zero confidence on what that looks like. So if you are drafting today, I think you can take one of two strategies. You either go with, I'm going to make the assumption that Buffalo does or doesn't get the bye and build from there on. And in that case, half the time you might lose that completely team, because if you go Buffalo with just Josh Allen and just James Cook or something, and they don't get that bye, and they get that bye, you're probably going to just, hey, take your zeros, eat it. The alternative is, if you still want to draft now and you want to draft these teams, you can play it a little safer. And when you're stacking on the other side with the NFC, maybe you cover it with a late Baker Mayfield, with a late Jordan Love. So I think, and we'll get a little more into this later, but as the as the weeks evolve leading into the playoffs, we can change our strategy based on what information is out there and which teams we're leaning into, and whether or not we're kind of taking a more safe approach with covering those buy spots with that extra QB, with maybe that extra running back.
While we're here on Strategy 101, any other mistakes that you guys see people making out there that are really bad mistakes that leave them, that just crush their EV? Sam, any other big mistakes that you see out there people making other than not giving themselves a live chance in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think that's really the biggest one, is you need to think what it looks like when you get to the Super Bowl and kind of work back from there as to how you get there. I think the mistake I see people make the most all kind of relates to that in a way, but one of them is, you get late in the draft and you don't really like the guys that could be stacked with, the lineup that you're building so far. Let's say you're making an Eagles stack. Once Hertz is gone, Saquon's gone, the wide receivers, and even Goddard's gone, it gets really uncomfortable. People don't want to draft Jahan Dotson or Johnny Wilson, these kind of guys. And so then they'll go draft a one-off on some other NFC team that, might not even be that live to make it, or they play the Eagles in the first round potentially. You're just losing a ton of EV on your team right away. And people just don't stay disciplined. So I'd say if there's one thing overall that people make a mistake on, it's being disciplined about getting that team through.
Yeah. We didn't touch on teams that play each other in the first round, right? And I that was a mistake that I saw from people last year. Actually, I don't even know if it's a mistake, but in my head, at least, it was a mistake where people are drafting, like, let's say the Cowboys were playing the Eagles or whatever in the first round of the playoffs. Too many teams have too many guys from that one game. You want to leave yourself, I think, an out to get 2 games from both guys if you're in the same conference. Any other mistake? Any thoughts on that? And then any other mistakes that you see people making out there?
Yeah, and ideally, I'd even take it a step further and say, I don't want to be drafting the 7 seed and the 1 seed from the same conference, because even though I'm getting 2 games from that 7 seed, if they actually pull off the upset, they then play the 1. Or same example with maybe even the 2 and the 3 seed, who are most likely going to play each other when they both win. I want to have 2 teams that are available in the conference championship, because if you look at the structure, yeah, that first round is either 1 out of 6 or 2 out of 6. If you then look at Underdog, we're talking 1 out of 10, 1 out of 10, and you're getting fewer teams. So it's that much more important to keep more live players as we go further down into the playoffs. I'd say one other mistake that I'm seeing is when you're thinking about which teams you want to stack. Let's use Buffalo and Detroit as an example, because majority of those elite players are going in the first 2 rounds of drafts. You can show up to the Super Bowl and you don't need to have all of the Buffalo and Detroit great players, because it's impossible to be drafting Josh Allen and Jahmyr Gibbs. They're basically going in the first round every time. So it's okay if you're just getting maybe 5 or 6 from that, but some secondary pieces. But if you're drafting Buffalo and let's say you're then looking at Green Bay or Minnesota, if you I go full Buffalo and I'm throwing 1 or 2 Green Bay and 1 or 2 Minnesota, if the Super Bowl happens with Buffalo, one of those 2, and you kind of split your chances between like not getting all the elite pieces, you're going to be behind the 8 ball come Super Bowl. You might have gotten Addison and Hawkinson, but someone else said, hey, I'm going all Buffalo, and I also grabbed Jefferson and Jacobs. And so I think we got to think back from when we get to the Super Bowl, how close am I to having the optimal lineup? For Buffalo and Detroit, you don't actually need to have all the elite players because we can't get them. But if you're pairing like Buffalo with Green Bay, Buffalo with Minnesota, Buffalo, Tampa, it is possible that people are drafting all of the best players from there. So if you're only kind of half-assing it and getting a couple of those, you're behind the 8 ball. I wouldn't really advise that.
I will say too, I think it's important to recognize, like, we are talking about the kind of flagship tournaments on both sites. They don't have as many like small contests for playoff best ball, but they'll probably launch some of those smaller contests when it comes closer to playoff time. And in those situations, I think it is okay here and there to draft teams that face each other early on, because you don't need to be as perfect.
For sure. Okay, back to the large field, the flagship stuff. Herzig mentioned optimal lineup. I'm already concerned, and Herzig's probably gonna laugh at me. I'm already concerned that the winning team's been drafted, and we're like 4 weeks, 3 weeks or whatever before the playoffs even start. And the reason I say that is because you get these teams that people can draft. Like last year, I thought we had a big edge. I really liked Buffalo to go on a run and end up making the playoffs. We were getting absurd Buffalo teams 3 weeks before the playoffs started. If you went and tried to do that after week 18, you could not have the Buffalo stacks that I had earlier on. And if Buffalo had gone to the Super Bowl, I felt like it was a total print fest, but maybe it was just dumb for people to draft Buffalo after week 18. So I know we talk about this in regular best ball too, about the time box stuff. I feel like it's even more exaggerated now, where the winning team could have already been drafted and you can't get the teams that people are getting now. And that's accentuated here because it's so much about the team stacking stuff, not just as much player takes and one-offs like regular best ball is. So what do you say to people like me, Herzig, that are already worried that winning team has been drafted?
Yeah, I don't even think worry is the right word. I think it's like that strategic concern. That is very valid. And I think with Buffalo was a good example where they were virtually free in drafts. And as they got more expensive, you then didn't want to chase that. And I think that's the strategic aspect that we take from this is as we are in different parts of the regular season leading up into the playoffs, we should be changing how we draft. And like right now, I'm focusing on building the nut teams that I may not be able to get in the future. Example is Buffalo and the Rams. Right now, you can pretty much get all those top players. Rams are only 60% to make the playoffs. But if they make the playoffs, Cooper Kupp, Puka, Kyren, those are all shooting up the draft board. And so in 2 weeks, if they are now looking like 80% to make the playoffs, you're right. You probably shouldn't be taking the Buffalo and now 1 or 2 pieces of the Rams, like I was talking about the other example, because you're behind the 8 ball. As I get closer to the playoffs, that's when I actually like to start focusing more on the 1 seeds. I think if you've been trying to get the 1 seeds now, it's a really difficult, and to be honest, like if you end up drafting the 2 teams that end up getting the 1 seeds, I'm willing to say just about every team that's already been drafted is probably not going to be advancing past the first round, because maybe they had a Seahawk, maybe they had some, suboptimal players in there, maybe they don't have even a full roster, but the week before the playoffs, everything's set, all that information is out there. I know who the better one-off pieces are. I know exactly who the 1 seeds are, so I can make sure that I'm only stacking, taking 4 or 5 from those 2 teams. And so I think as we get further into the playoffs, that's when I'm more likely to lean into those 1 seeds because I can better cover their first round. Right now, I'm leaning into what are the lineups that if this happens, that I'm not going to be able to get later. 2 weeks ago, I was going heavy on the Bucks. Right now, I'm going on the Rams. Those, maybe if you want to even say you could go for Seahawks, I don't know, it feels gross, but like that's where I feel like the opportunities are to really get the optimal teams now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you have a take like, I don't know, the Bucks are going to punt this off and the Falcons are going to somehow get into the playoffs and win this division, Falcon stuff is going to be very cheap right now. Same with Colts, who are like, 11% or something like that to get in. If you have a take like that, they'll never be as cheap as they are now, is what Herzig is trying to say. Sam, any other thoughts on this whole idea of timing when you draft and different strategies at different points as we lead up to the playoffs here?
Yeah, I think Herzig kind of nailed it overall. I think it's good to take a portfolio-based approach here and just track. You can make a simple table on a notepad or in a Google Sheet or something, tracking which drafts you've taken which combinations of team in. And, if you've taken a bunch of teams early, think about why you took them early and where they stand now. And if maybe there's a different value at this point in time. So just keep track of all of that kind of thing. And you need to really pay attention to how the ADPs are shifting week to week, because it really will change, where the plus EV options are each week, even sometimes day to day within the week.
Okay. I think you can have a different strategy from each draft slot. I know, Herzig, you've talked about mapping out your draft from the draft slot. It's an interesting strategy. I don't want to get too formulaic when I draft, but again, unlike regular best ball where I'm incorporating player takes and stacking is important to me, but not absolutely everything in playoffs, stacking is absolutely way more important to me, especially at the team level, not just quarterback stuff. So, what do you think about mapping out a strategy from each draft slot?
Yeah, I mean, like when you're doing traditional best ball, you take a running back in the first round. Maybe now you're like, okay, I'm going to go hero running back and not draft one for a little bit. Like it changes this minute amount of your overall strategy based off that first pick. Here, as soon as you make your first round pick, the rest of your draft, like, I don't know, I'm making this number up, but like 70% of the possible paths you've gone down are now disappeared. Like, you have got this one team, and that is my AFC or my NFC team. And now you're only limited to, okay, there's 7 teams in the other conference that I can choose from. And honestly, out of those 7, you can probably already start ruling out 1 or 2 because they're really bad teams. I don't want to do the Broncos or something. And then maybe one team might be ruled out as well because someone else already took the best players of that. So like just from that one pick, we're probably already down to like 3 or 4 teams that we might stack with. And so that's where like, hey, I like to start thinking through at various points throughout the week. As Sam said, the ADP continues to change. But right now, Josh Allen, he's my 1.01. When I start with Buffalo, I'm hoping James Cook comes back to me in the second round. Then, now I need to start thinking, who am I stacking with? What are the 2 NFC teams? And I think each pick from number 2, if it's Saquon, is it Gibbs? Is it Jalen Hurts? I'm not sure, but that's your strategy. But you should be thinking through because each one of those picks is so impactful on how the rest of your strategy and draft is going to turn out. So it's better to kind of, hey, get ahead of the game and think through what do I want to do in each of these spots.
I don't want to hear the complaining when people get sniped, right? People are going to say, this idiot, I had a Buffalo Philly stack set up, and this idiot has a team that can't win, but he took James Cook when I was going to. That's the reason that there's EV. Please don't complain about that stuff. I'm so tired of seeing tweets of complaining about people playing bad in best ball. I mean, I can't have that. Anyways, Sam, anything else to add here on this idea?
I think it's super, super important to you don't have to have like a map of this is my game plan entering, but you have to have an idea of where the ADPs are because you need to know what's possible later on in the drafts. Like there's let's say Hertz goes first, and then you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna grab AJ Brown once it comes to you. Like that's kind of pointless unless you have an idea of exactly how you're going to build around a situation where the Eagles can get to the Super Bowl. And if a lot of the other AFC quarterbacks are already gone, except for Mahomes, and Mahomes is going to get the bye, well, then you don't really have a path to getting to the Super Bowl. So you need to like be very conscious with all of your early picks of how can I turn this into a team that can arrive in the Super Bowl with a fully loaded roster, or else you're instantly dead. And when all of the money is in the Super Bowl round, you're just giving up massive amounts of expected value there.
Yeah, it's not just that all the money's in the Super Bowl round, it's that all the money's at the top of the Super Bowl round too. Like you don't just have to get there, you also have to get to the top. All right. Let's talk about strategy adjustments for Underdog versus DraftKings. We already mentioned, I think, an important one, which is the wild card round on Underdog is way easier to get out of than the wild card round on DraftKings. In other words, you can, I think, one strategy adjustment I would make is you can take more teams that could get a bye on Underdog than you can on DraftKings. Would you agree with that, Herzig, and any other important differences between Underdog and DraftKings in terms of strat?
Yeah, so each site has their main big contest. Both of them have some pretty substantial prizes in it. For Underdog, that main one, the Gauntlet, it's 2 out of 6 in the first round, 1 out of 10 in the divisional, 1 out of 10 in the conference championships, 375 in the championship. For DraftKings, it's 1 out of 6 every round until a 544 person final. So what do we take from those? First off, 2 out of 6, 33% compared to 10%, 10% shows how much easier it is in that first round to get through. So we should just really, really not be prioritizing surviving that wild card round. And if anything, be willing to get a little crazy, take a little chances, and just to build better teams for those 10% ones, the divisional, the conference championships, and of course the 375. On the DraftKings side, 1 out of 6 every round. I'm more willing to I'm less willing to really lean into those 1 seeds and take chances because, as Sam said, like when one player goes off, like you really need that player. And so, sure, I guess you can take it the other way and say, hey, it's DraftKings scoring. If you really can hit that high player, maybe you can survive it. I think it's worth noting because DraftKings has higher point scoring. If you take a 0 on DraftKings, it's that much harder to advance through that round. On Underdog, there's times you could take a 0 from a wide receiver if your QB, if your other players kind of go off. And then the last thing is those numbers, 544 versus 375. Both of them are pretty large numbers, but that 544 especially, and the way that other people are drafting on DraftKings, it just gives you that much more emphasis. We really need to build for that Super Bowl, and so much of the money is top heavy, up at the top, up really at the top there. So build for the Super Bowl, go big. And one more format thing is the tight end. I'll give some quick thoughts there. Is on Underdog, wide receiver and tight end is grouped together. So tight ends kind of just, they kind of blend away. Yes, they can still be helpful, but it's just not as big of a deal. On DraftKings, we really don't have the elite tight ends anymore. A lot of these teams have a couple of them. You have Andrews and Likely. You've got Dawson Knox and Kincaid. So think through the teams that you're drafting. If it is someone who only has like one Hawkinson or one Laporta, maybe boost that player a little and make sure you get the tight end as part of your stacks. If it's someone that they have multiple, it's not as high scoring, maybe you can kind of devalue it and know that, hey, worst case, you can still grab one of their secondary tight ends.
Yeah, and this stuff is reflected in our rankings. Again, for anyone with the best ball package, you can see in the rankings on Underdog that tight ends are going to be worth less simply because you don't have to play one. You could play a wide receiver or a tight end. Sam, any more thoughts on the differences in strat between Underdog and DraftKings?
I think, on DraftKings, just due to the nature of the scoring, like one player could be so meaningful. So I think you can get away with a little bit more. I referenced that Jake Ferguson example from last year, but just in general, like focusing on upside, I think, might matter slightly more on DraftKings. Obviously, we need to be conscious of the scoring environment with full PPR on DraftKings too. But just overall, you can get away with more and take a little bit more risk.
Okay.
I want to throw one more on DraftKings. And maybe DraftKings, if you're listening, you can fix this, but you cannot search for team names on DraftKings. So if you are trying to do a Lions stack on Underdog, you can type in Detroit, you can type in Lions, and it'll show you all those players. On DraftKings, you cannot. So it's that much more important to be either, hey, paying attention, going through as soon as you draft who it is. If you've got our rankings in there, it'll show you who are the more relevant ones. There are so many players like that have virtually no chance of making the playoffs that are still in the like legitimate ADP on DraftKings. So having rankings in there, just even so you can more easily flip through and find the same players in those teams, is helpful. Maybe by the end of the playoffs, we'll be able to search by team name. That'd be nice. But if not, just be wary of that.
I like it. I like it. I like anything. The worse the tech is, the better it is for me, man. I don't want people to be able to sort by their team. If you go to our rankings, let's say you had two screens up, like a man, you have two computers, a computer here and a computer there. On one computer, I have our rankings up where I can sort by team. And then on DraftKings, you can't. No problem. All right. Okay. Behind the scenes, Herzig has been working with the team at the Solver to build a brand new tool. This tool is going to cover Battle Royale, NBA daily drafts, and playoff drafts. It's going to be $29.99 per month per sport. For more details on that, we'll tweet when it's ready, but and we'll probably send an email when it's ready as well. But you'll be able to find the link to all the Solver stuff in the subscribe tab on ETR. Herzig, anything else you want to say about what's been going on behind the scenes with the Solver draft assistant?
Yeah, I mean, I know a couple people have been in beta, been testing it out for the NFL dailies and have really enjoyed it. So great to hear that feedback for the playoff best ball. That should be live in the next week or so. But pretty excited for that because it's a combination of it's going to help make recommendations for who you should be playing based off things like conferences, opponents, projections, who you've already taken, all that. And then it also is going to have an overlay feature where the same information that you could have by having multiple tabs up, such as percent chance to make playoffs, percent chance to make Super Bowl, 1 seed, projected games, all of that will also be on the screen there. So you can kind of pick and choose what information is helpful for you as you're drafting. And yeah, this is going to go live soon, and we're excited to get feedback from you all, and we'll continue to kind of improve it as the time goes on.
Okay, yeah. And as I mentioned, also is going to support Battle Royales, which I know have gotten very popular on Underdog, and the NBA daily stuff on Underdog as well. Again, this only works for Underdog, not DraftKings. On the roadmap to get to DraftKings, but V1 of this is going to be Underdog only. So again, stay tuned for more news there on the Solver Draft Assistant for snake drafts. Last thing I want to get to before we do a live draft ourselves is some of these team/player takes. Now, I don't think it's necessarily as important right now. The most important thing to me is, again, if you can identify a team that you think is going to go on a run here and make the playoffs unexpectedly, that's the biggest edge that you can find. But you might have some other takes here going forward. Herzig, any team or player takes you want to get off your chest as we sit here on, December 17th?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've got two different voices inside my head kind of fighting both ways because my more analytical is like, hey, the teams don't actually matter and we know what their percents are and we should build with the outcomes, and the teams that are less likely are, we can get the better players for. So it kind of evens out stuff out. And the other side is, yeah, but like the Bills are just so good that the Bills are probably just going to go to the Super Bowl. So shouldn't we just be building as much Bills teams as possible? And it's difficult. What I've kind of leveled on is I still go in kind of agnostic, but when things kind of don't go to according to plan, or if I have a chance to kind of lean one way, I will, and might, for me personally, get an AFC team of the Bills. And the NFC, I personally think it's completely wide open. Like what? The Bucks beat both the Lions and Eagles earlier in the year. They just handled the Chargers. Rams beat the Bills. They could probably go on a run. The Vikings, the Packers, the Lions, I could see any of those winning in a shootout. Eagles might be the best team, but like, I don't know. So I'm just going to take the NFC and be like, hey, I'm going to go for as many combinations. I think any team can go on a run. AFC, I'm still willing to build strategically, but if I have a kind of lean, I think the Bills are a really strong team. And if they don't get the bye, like, gosh, they could just be quite valuable.
Yeah. My one team level take is that I think the Bills are the best team, but I know a lot of sharp people that have Ravens #1 in their power ratings, even though the Ravens have lost a lot of games. Ravens also beat the Bills earlier this year. The Ravens are not going to get a first round bye. So you get a little bit more equity there where you can get 4 games out of the Ravens. So I haven't looked too closely at ADP yet, but that was one team level take that I had, that maybe Ravens are a bit undervalued. Sam, any team level or player level takes you want to get off your chest here?
Yeah, I love player takes just in general, but one of the things I love about the playoff best ball is it's one of the few formats that we play that I don't feel like I need to have player takes. But I think the field still tries to incorporate the takes more than they really should. And as a result, some teams just go kind of wildly undervalued. I think, the Chiefs right now, I know there's some uncertainty with Mahomes and his ankle right now, but they're kind of slipping quite a bit. And it feels like every year now, the public starts to get off the Chiefs a little bit. And then it comes around the playoff time and it's like, they're amazing in the playoffs. How do we ever doubt them? Why do we ever think maybe this was the Bills' year? Like right now, Mahomes is going kind of late. I was in a draft earlier today. He slipped all the way to like 25th overall. Like this is a time to start buying the Chiefs, I think, because if they go out there the next 2 weeks and Mahomes looks perfectly fine, like they're going to shoot up the board again, and they're going to be especially valuable if they do get the #1 seed, or if they lose the #1 seed, they'll be a great value. And then if they do get the #1 seed, well, at least right now you were able to build teams that are much more likely to advance, even if the Chiefs do have the bye. And then the other one that I think is really interesting right now is the Steelers, who I don't think they're an amazing team, but I do think that they have the potential to reach the Super Bowl. And I think people are just down on the Steelers offense as a whole. And look, I'm not excited about the Steelers offense either. But if they get to the Super Bowl, they're going to score more points in the Super Bowl than all the other AFC teams are because they're not there. So right now you can get George Pickens in like the 6th round or so, and he's the first Steeler to go. So it's just a really easy, cheap stack to throw in at the back of some drafts. And again, they have the potential to get there, and they're a playoff lock at this point.
Yeah. God, the Steelers offense without George Pickens is just a total disaster. But this is what happens. Like they come off a game without George Pickens in Philadelphia, and then nobody wants to touch them at all. Whereas if they had a different matchup with George Pickens, they would have been going in a way different spot. One more question at player level takes, Herzig. What about like one injury away running backs? In other words, should I be taking Ray Davis? Should I be taking Kenny Gainwell? Should I be taking Bucky Irving? Like, how valuable do you think one injury away? Because we have a while to go until the playoffs. I mean, there is time for Saquon Barkley, who got banged up last week, to get hurt. There is time for Rachaad White to get hurt, etc. So what do you think about the one injury away running backs right now?
Yeah, to be honest, a lot of those are already being drafted. I mean, you saw what Ty Johnson's done the last 2 games. Kenneth Gainwell even getting a decent amount of play. So it's not like it's a sneaky play that you're able to kind of, I'm going to grab this. But I do think it's actually still a really strong play. And particularly, I like grabbing those guys when I miss out on James Cook, when I miss out on Saquon Barkley. I start off with Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. Okay, in that Super Bowl, how do I beat the teams that have Saquon Barkley? Well, maybe Saquon Barkley gets hurt. As you said, we still have 3-4 weeks until the actual playoffs. We have then another month until the Super Bowl. Very plausible for an injury to happen. And now, if I'm grabbing Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and I have 80% Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Gainwell, like that is a fantastic team. And I didn't lose a first-round pick on Saquon Barkley. And those are the teams that you won't be able to get in 2 weeks if Saquon Barkley does go down for the year.
Yeah, exactly. All right. We've said it all in strategy. No one cares. They just want to see us do a draft. Let's fire one up right now. All right, we're going to fire into a gauntlet draft on Underdog now. $25 buy-in, $200K to first. Going to try to talk through this draft as we do it. It is a 300-person final, looks like. Herzig, a little bit smaller than we mentioned earlier, but I think still applies to the 375-man final that we mentioned earlier. We will see what pick we get here, and then it will be away we go. Where do you think is the ideal place to pick from right now?
For me, 1. I think Josh Allen allows me to get that Bills stack, the Bills players, because after James Cook, like, how much confidence do you have in Cooper versus Shakir versus Kincaid versus Coleman versus Ty Johnson, whoever? Like, the projections are pretty probably, just not that different. So, hey, if I can take the top two guys, have my choice of a variety of NFC teams, and then still get some later Bills players, just feels like the kind of nut run out right now.
Herzig has uploaded the ETR rankings onto Underdog. There's instructions on how to do that if anyone doesn't know on the ranking site if you have that best ball subscription. Our rankings are a little bit different than, especially even at the top, they're a little bit different than ADP. We have Josh Allen 1, Jalen Hurts 2, whereas the field is taking Saquon Barkley ahead of Jalen Hurts. Any thoughts on that dynamic, Herzig?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty tough, except that you really need to have a quarterback when you get to the Super Bowl. And when we consider, would you rather have Jalen Hurts and Kenneth Gainwell or Saquon Barkley and no QB? Or you're saying, okay, well, I'm playing for the Steelers, but then you need the Steelers, because if you miss out in these first two rounds on one of these top 5 QBs, chances are you're now playing for one of those Steelers, Chargers, and so forth. So that's why when you look at the kind of math behind it, the getting that QB is that much more important. But I will say, in the first two rounds, it turns more into a strategy basis based off who else is being taken, what QBs are available, just to make sure you don't get locked out at QB.
All right. We have drawn the 5th pick out of 6 teams here in this draft. Again, on Underdog, you do not have to start, we don't have to play a tight end at all. Wide receiver and tight end is indeed one position here. So out of the 5 hole, Herzig, who do you think likely falls to us?
Yeah, and by ADP, if Jalen Hurts falls to us, that'd be great, because most likely that means Barkley went ahead, and we should probably be able to get AJ Brown. You'll notice if you do drafts, like, it pretty much works out pretty cleanly with stacks where Goff ends up with either Amon-Ra or Gibbs, Henry ends up with Lamar, Hurts ends up with AJ Brown. So for the most part, you kind of just let it come to you. But yeah, I'd be very happy with a Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown start if that's what we go with.
Sam, any thoughts on drafting from the 5 hole?
Yeah, I agree. Ideally, we get Jalen Hurts here, and then we'll come back around and get AJ Brown. I think this early in the drafting season, we get more experienced drafters and more serious drafters. Once we start to have more casuals come in, it'll be more snipes going on, and that'll make it harder to get these guys paired together. But we got it pretty clean right now.
Yeah. Yep. So first pick with, go ahead. Sorry.
Before we go to Jalen Hurts, we could also, if we wanted to go Lamar, Derrick Henry, and then we go for a Rams or a Bucks or a Packers or a Vikings. What do you guys want to do?
I think Eagles are more likely to make the Super Bowl than the Ravens, but not by a ton. But I do think they're more likely.
Yeah, I think too, if it becomes more clear in a week or so that maybe the Eagles are going to be the number 2 seed, Jalen Hurts might start to creep up more. So I think we might have a little bit of value right here that we'll lose soon.
All right. So we took Jalen Hurts at 5. Lamar and Derrick Henry stack went right after us. Clean AJ Brown pick back to us here. Barkley went 3rd. So AJ Brown, clearly the best Eagle left and clearly one of the best plays on the entire board. So no brainer there to go AJ Brown. And you see everybody's going to start stacking. The Lamar guy has Derrick Henry. The Amon-Ra guy did not take a lion. He took James Cook here. Herzig, any thoughts on that one?
We'll see if it goes to bite him, but normally that goes Jared Goff, because the situation is when you're going Detroit and Buffalo here, what are you trying to do unless you're hoping Goff falls back to you at 16? Because you're not getting Josh Allen. So if you're building for a Super Bowl with the Lions and Bills, your only chance at winning this is if you also have a live quarterback. And since Josh Allen was already taken, your only hope is that Goff falls to you at 16. You can either say, hey, this is a really gutsy play and maybe it's going to work out for him, or Jahmyr Gibbs went to the number 2 drafter. It's pretty obvious that Jared Goff, that person's going to take Jared Goff, and that's what we just saw happen.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty clear mistake to me to go James Cook there. Now he is, if he goes Detroit, Buffalo full-on stack, he's not going to have a quarterback there in the Super Bowl. As for us, Sam, once we start Hurts and AJ Brown, what is your thought process here for the rest of the draft?
Yeah, so we saw Devonta just went at number 12 overall to to the team that had Josh Allen. He probably doesn't make it back to us very often. If he did, that would have been awesome. But at this point, we know we're kind of playing for the Eagles as our NFC team stack, and we already have the quarterback there. So we don't really want to be getting into other NFC teams. And the next best Eagle is Dallas Goedert, who we don't need to draft until a little bit later. If you're watching on screen, you can see his ADP right now is 38 overall. So we have a bit of time to get him. So at this point, we really need to figure out what are the top AFC teams we want to consider stacking alongside here.
Yeah. And I think people are going to say, okay, how do I decide what AFC team to stack with, Herzig? Or is it just the best ADP, our best ranking on the AFC side? We do have Pacheco available to us.
For me, it's looking at what else was already taken in the draft and what I think I can build a strong team. Nico Collins was taken. If we didn't want to go Nico, we could maybe go Nico and Mixon, and then you're building for an elite, hey, Eagles, Texans. Here, I think it's probably the Chiefs or the Ravens. I'd probably lean with a Pacheco and go with the Chiefs because there's enough kind of secondary pieces there. While for the Ravens, we've already missed out on Derrick Henry and Lamar.
Is there any concern to you that if we have Eagles Chiefs that we may have no one in the wild card round? They could both get a bye.
And that in that world, this lineup, it's dead. To be honest, we're probably going to build this that the Eagles are not going to get the wild card. If we want to build, not the wild card, that they're not going to get the bye. If we want to build it that the Chiefs will get the bye, that's okay. And we can kind of protect against that. But it doesn't make sense for us to kind of build against. The other is we have Zay Flowers here. So we can kind of say, hey, we're never going to have just a full Philly KC. Let's go Philly and KC and Baltimore.
Yeah. And we don't, I mean, Zay Flowers to me is clearly the best player to take here. And there's no Chiefs that are close. I think, yeah, it's an interesting spot. Yeah. I mean, Worthy, Hopkins seems a bit early for them for Zay. So, yeah.
And most likely
we went Zay Flowers there. So we're clearly going Chiefs and Ravens as the options from the AFC. I think another interesting thing we could have done, though, I think, going Baltimore is equally valid, is to stack up some of the Buffalo receivers. So we're essentially saying with this stack, we're hoping that the Eagles get the 2 seed in the NFC. Well, we need the Eagles to do well in round 1 to advance out of our pod anyways. We could have stacked both KC and Buffalo there and guaranteed that we had at least one team advancing to the second round. And we also have one team that won't have the bye. And if the 2 teams did eventually face each other in the playoffs, they wouldn't face each other until the AFC Championship game. And that might not be a stack that we could get a little bit later on, a week from now, maybe.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's not as formulaic as it seems, right? Because you do have other options like Sam alluded to. And we could have gone 3 different ways there, Bills, Chiefs, or Baltimore. And I think that was all would have been interesting picks. Herzig, what do you think about our pick coming up here? We're going to be on the clock at 29 overall.
Okay, so Dallas Goedert is kind of the last core Eagle piece, he and Kenneth Gainwell. And because we're going to be defaulting with, hey, we know Jalen Hurts is going to be our QB, where they're not going to get the bye in this world. I do want to consider the Dallas Goedert. I'm going to take a look real quick and see on the turn what they're building. They've got Baltimore, Green Bay, Detroit. So we're probably okay to let Goddard go if we want to grab like another Chief. I also think they're not going to grab a Chief though. So I'd probably then go to ADP and say, hey, Xavier Worthy or Mark Andrews. Oh, real quick, they have Lamar. Yes, agreed.
Yeah, so we want to go Mark Andrews there because he's the guy that might not get back to us, and we need to make sure we get another high upside Baltimore guy here. And I think that's kind of interesting. One of the things you have to really be cognizant of when you're drafting these playoff best ball teams is what is everybody else around you drafting, because it kind of dictates the order that you need to draft your players in.
All right.
Yeah.
Back to us, and we have Goddard. Or I'd be shocked me if people take Goddard. He's hurt. He's a tight end that you don't need. But there are some people building Eagles stuff. There's a Devonta Smith side over there. So yeah, if you don't think he's going to get back to us, I'm fine with Goddard. But yeah.
And if I look at everyone else that's available, Xavier Worthy, Rashad Bateman, Hollywood Brown, yes, like some are better than others, but it's all kind of close. While Dallas Goedert's kind of the last eagle that we'd really want. And when I think about the Super Bowl, we're making one core assumption, and that's that the Eagles are making it. We are then leaving ourselves optionality for it being the Ravens or the Chiefs. In that world, I'd rather take the player on the NFC, the team that I know is going to make the Super Bowl, in my assumption, while on the other, it's only a 50% chance of the two teams that it works out. So given Super Bowl, we know Goddard is there, while if we go Worthy, if we go any of the others, Chiefs or Ravens, it could be, but it might also be the other team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. At this point, would you take any one-off players, or are we only looking at Eagles, Chiefs, and Ravens?
I would not take any one-offs from the NFC. If we got to a place where, like, I mean, our running back, getting a one-off running back is probably pretty smart if this Chiefs ends up getting the bye, because all we have is Pacheco right now.
So I would definitely want to round out running backs with more options here. I don't think I would take a AFC running back unless it's Baltimore or KC that we've already established. I kind of like to play it as if I'm going to at least have a chance to have a full roster playing in the conference championship games. So if we wanted to do that, we would need to make sure that we take an NFC team that the Eagles wouldn't play until then. But I also think it's fine if we have a big enough portfolio of getting, let's say, we already have Pacheco, we also add Gainwell, and we add Justice Hill, like one of the three having a good enough game.
All right.
Yeah, a 4 running back build feels like what we're going to be doing here to really just give ourselves outs for that second running back.
All right, we're on the clock here. Any thoughts on our pick right now here, Herzig?
Yeah, this comes back to, we know that the person at the turn here is going with the Ravens. He's got that Lamar and the Derrick Henry. We have Bateman available, and so I think we grab Bateman here.
Right, and so this guy's going to hate us, but there's nothing that he can do. And I don't know. I mean, picking at the turn strikes me as a bit harder in these formats because we have taken Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, and Bateman from him after he started with Lamar at the 6th spot. I'm not sure there's much he could have done, though, right?
Zay Flowers, he could have. And that would have been because we had Zay Flowers at pick 20, pick 18 and 19. He went Josh Jacobs and Jamison Williams. Very much should have grabbed Zay Flowers with one of those two. Because also, if he grabs Zay Flowers there, we're not going Baltimore at all anymore because we just missed out on that Zay Flowers. And now he probably also gets Mark Andrews later on because we're not fighting him.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are the kind of mistakes that people make that make this so soft. And yeah. All right, we're back on the clock here.
I think Kenneth Gainwell feels like a good one here because it would really be unfortunate to miss out on him. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Gainwell is the right guy here. We want to make sure we have at least one running back from our big stack that's going to gain some yards. Yeah, he might only have like 10 rushing yards a week, but that's better than 0. And there's going to be so many dead teams that every live player helps a lot. And I think the other kind of lesson here is that it's okay to reach massively ahead of ADP because we need to have specific combinations of our players. And let's say on a given team that we're stacking, 4 players, four of the best players from that team all have ADPs in the 50s. Well, we need to start drafting them in the 40s or the 30s to be able to get them all on our team. So I have no problem getting many rounds ahead of ADP in this format, as long as I have a plan for what I'm actually doing.
Yeah, I mean, you see on the board here, we took Kenneth Gainwell before Amari Cooper, right? And in no world would I ever say that I think Amari Cooper is going to score more points and that Kenneth Gainwell is going to score more points than Amari Cooper. But due to the format and due to our team, Gainwell is the right pick. The other thing that I'd say is we don't have Barkley. If he goes down, we just got Gainwell at 44 overall, and we could have an absolute print fest on our hands if Saquon Barkley does get hurt. Almost back to us here, Herzig. Any thoughts on the upcoming pick?
Yeah, and I think here Justice Hill feels like the right one. 1, it prevents Nick AV, who had that Baltimore, from getting him. And 2, it gives us a position of need, a team that's going to be playing in the wild card round. We've seen Justice Hill having legitimate snap share. And yeah, I just think he makes a lot of sense. We have 2 more picks. So after Hill, we can kind of think through what that last pick is.
Sam, any thoughts on Justice here? And then our last
Yeah, I
pick.
think Justice Hill's a no-brainer here. He gives us another running back out in a really weak room, and he's the only team that we're stacking, being Baltimore, that we don't have a running back from. So I think Justice Hill is just a complete no-brainer. As far as who we could get with our last pick, we're a little light on Kansas City receivers. We don't have any receivers from Kansas City, and we only have 2 receivers from Philadelphia. So we start to get a little thin if that Super Bowl ends up being Kansas City versus Philadelphia. So I think I would be in favor of getting another receiver, either Kansas City or Philadelphia. None of them are amazing, but again, it's better to have a few points from a live player than 0 points from a dead player.
Yeah, this is tough because you see Lad McConkey there, and you're just like, Lad McConkey's like gonna put up so many points, but we want to build for the Super Bowl. So Noah Gray,
Better than Kelsey.
I like it.
We have on a format where we do not need to draft tight end at all. We ended up with 3 tight ends: Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, and Noah Gray. So Herzig, how do you think this draft ended up going for us?
I think it's okay. We kind of hedged ourselves by going with the KC and the Baltimore. The Philly side of things, I feel, no Devontae Smith doesn't happen that often, but I do have a decent amount of teams that have Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, and Devontae Smith. And that's honestly one of the reasons why we have Jalen Hurts number 2 overall. If you go Jalen Hurts number 2 overall, you still likely get AJ Brown. Usually falls back to you. And you also have a better chance of getting Devontae Smith because your next pick is pick 14. So I would say we're a little behind the 8 ball in that one. Getting Pacheco, though, is a strong one for the Chiefs. I don't think there's that many starts that go Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Isaiah Pacheco, because you're really locking into those 2. There's the risk of both being 1 seeds, at least one being a 1 seed. So I'd say, hey, we still want things to kind of fall right for us in the next couple of weeks with the playoffs. But honestly, our best case scenario is probably if the Chiefs get the bye here. So the majority of those Chiefs teams fall out. And since we only have the Pacheco and the Noah Gray, that ends up being our Super Bowl.
Sam, any final thoughts on our team here today?
Yeah, we may not have the perfect team in terms of the maximum value we could have achieved at this point in time with some of the other drafts going on. But at the same time, it's a really strong structure. We have some relatively weak players on our team. But if we get a situation where the Eagles are in the Super Bowl and we get like Ravens Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, we're going to be in a really, really strong position. There's going to be a lot of dead teams there. And I'm glad that we kind of stuck to the strategy of getting players on our stacks that can arrive there instead of taking too many one-offs. And I think a lot of the Eagles teams I see other people drafting end up with a lot of one-offs because they get impatient with how few strong Eagles players there are available.
I agree. And yeah, people are definitely making mistakes in this draft, and this is very early in the process. You're going to get in rooms closer to the actual playoffs where every team's going to be making mistakes. I mean, every team's going to be making mistakes that I think will give us more EV. This one, I would say, on our $25 entry, I'd say we're making at least $5. Herzig, not a bad, maybe more, maybe 6. We're in it. Okay. This was fun. I think it is a very fascinating game from a strategy perspective, and implementing it in drafts is a fascinating exercise. Also, shout out to all the playoff only best ball grinders out there. Very, very interesting game. I hope that this can serve as kind of an evergreen show that people can refer back to over the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks as they are drafting. Don't forget, best ball rankings and strategy articles are up on the site right now. If you have the best ball package, Solver, draft assistant coming soon. Stay tuned for tweets and emails about that. For Herzig, for Brott, who somehow survived Nashville, for producer Ryan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck. everybody.